You're thinking. Hi, this is Sally Morgan, physical therapist, craniosacral therapist, and Tellington T-Touch practitioner for animals and people. This is Tristan. He's a Corgi, and as you might be able to tell, it's a very windy day here at the beach, and it's not yet raining, but it will be after lunch. So Tristan had his walk this morning, and unlike yesterday where he was running willy-nilly, he was a much better boy today. So one of the things that I'm reminded of when I'm on vacation with dogs is dog emergency room visits, and no one ever wants to be in that situation. So I have a couple of ideas for you to keep in mind to prevent your dog from ever needing an emergency room visit. Hi, Danny. One of the first things, it's so simple and so hard for so many of us, is keep the toenails trimmed. So many small dogs have those pointy little like cat-like toenails. They get caught in things, they get ripped, they can bleed, and it's very difficult as an owner to see your dog suffering with a torn toenail. So keep them trimmed, even if you can only snip off the pointy end a little bit so they don't get caught in the furniture. That's a good thing to do. And another thing to keep in mind, if you do have a bloody toenail at your house and you don't have one of those septic pencils, you can just put flour on it. It will stop the bleeding, but it won't stop your dog from crying from the pain. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And also don't forget about the dew claws. If your dog has dew claws, make sure you trim those too. I've seen more injuries from dew claws getting caught than toenails actually myself. And another thing that I've talked about a lot on this show is to please get a chip in your dog. Dogs, especially around this time of year with the 4th of July and fireworks and outdoor birthday parties and things and fire engines, dogs get really scared really easily. And it's really important that your dog have a chip so that he can find his way home to you. And make sure you pay your dues for your chip annually. It's not very much for a lot of the companies, but even if you don't pay your dues, your dog will still be able to be located and returned to you if he is missing. And to that end, keep your yard fence in good order. If you have a fence or if you keep your dog out on a line briefly, make sure everything is in working order and not chewed up. A friend of mine used to put her Chihuahua out on a line, and some mice ate a piece of it one winter, and one of her Chihuahuas was found half a mile away running around in somebody's yard, and she didn't even realize he had broken the leash just by kind of going to the end of it. So that's another important thing. Many dogs end up in the emergency room from eating their bones. My own dogs, oh look, my mom is watching. Many dogs, including my own, have had bone-related injuries. Tristan had a pig knuckle once and got a slab fracture on a couple of his teeth. He will not be eating raw bones like that again, but he's hiding. He's ashamed of his bone incident. He was very enthusiastic at the time. But a marrow bone that has a hole in the middle and becomes shaped like a donut can easily slide over the lower jaw of your dog and prevent him from opening and closing his mouth. It can be painful if left there long enough. And a lot of people don't even notice it, especially if you have a golden retriever or a lab or a dog like that. It can be stuck on their lower jaw and their jowls are covering it and you can't see. So make sure that you give your dog a appropriate bone for his size. That means a very big bone for a large dog and a pretty medium-sized bone or bigger for a little guy like this. This guy could probably get a Labrador-sized marrow bone stuck over the top of his nose. And it's not a good thing, especially if you have an older dog. They have to be anesthetized sometimes to get the bone off of the dog. They have to use a saw. It can be very difficult. So be careful with the kinds of bones you give your dog, and to that end, all toys and chewies that you give your dog. The rubber ones that come apart in little pieces can lodge in their stomach and maybe or in their intestinal tract, and after a few days you may have a problem that you completely forgot he had that toy 5 days ago, and maybe you picked it up because it had some holes in it. But make sure you keep an eye on your dog if you see any missing toy parts around the house. I know a lot of dogs eat socks. My sister had a backyard load of socks from her Doberman who used to eat everybody's socks, and they made their way out. But not all rubber toys do that. And to that end, make sure you keep food and medication away from your dogs. I have Corgis. It's not such a problem to keep things out of their reach, but Corgis are good little mountain climbers and rock jumpers, and they can get up onto the chair and then onto the kitchen table. So if you keep your medication there, you might want to move it so that your dogs can't reach it. I personally have worked with many dogs who have eaten things they weren't supposed to in the kitchen, including a Labrador puppy who jumped onto the kitchen table and ate the salt and pepper shaker, including the plastic it was in, and then all of the people's heart medications, liver medications, and a variety of supplements. Very sick dog. And it was a Sunday, and the emergency room was about an hour and a half away from them. And so they called me to find out what to do to keep the dog stable until they got him to the emergency room. Another thing that can happen to dogs that could cause an emergency room visit might be just being aware of breed-specific issues in your dog. A lot of the, what I call smush-nosed dogs, the brachiocephalic dogs, are prone to breathing problems, and in this kind of summer heat, it can be a lot worse, and they can get heat exhaustion really easily. They can overheat because they can't cool themselves. They are not as effective as a long-nosed dog at cooling themselves with their tongue by panting. And so really, I can't emphasize enough, if you have a pug or a bulldog or a boxer or even a Shih Tzu, and even some of the Cavaliers and English Toy Spaniels, their noses are brachiocephalic enough, short, unlike my Corgi. If you have a pug type of nose, make sure you keep your dog cool. Really important to keep a fan running at their level in the house so that when they need to feel air, they can get it. It's sometimes not just enough to have air conditioning, because the air conditioning might not make it down to the level where your dog is. Also, in your car, make sure that your dog has a safe place to sit in your car. I teach my dogs all to lay on the floor behind the passenger seat. They don't really move or jump around. A lot of people like to drive with the car windows open and their dog getting a breeze. It's a classic thing that we see on commercials, but this is really unsafe for your dog. Even a bigger dog, like maybe a pointer or a Labrador or a golden retriever, if you have the window open wide enough for him to get his head out and you swing around a corner too fast or swerve or lose control of the car, he can fall out the window. So make sure you don't let your dog drive around with his head out the window. You can have the windows down a little bit, and beware of sunroofs. I know a few dogs that have tried to jump out the sunroof when they saw a dog or a squirrel, and have created quite a bit of driving hazard for the person with the back legs of the dog climbing over the steering wheel. So it is best to have your dog with a seatbelt in the back seat or in a crate in the back seat, which is really the safest thing to do if you're ever in an accident. So make sure you have a good place for your dog in the car. As with horses, we always worry about where the grain is stored and how carefully it's closed so that horses can't get out and get it and eat it all at one time. The same is true for your dogs. Big dogs are prone to bloat, so you want to make sure that you keep your food securely, especially if you have a big dog. You often have these stored on the floor. Put them in a cabinet with maybe a child safety lock on it so that the dog cannot break in and eat all of the food at once and end up with some intestinal problems. And certainly, if you have a puppy, keep a super close eye on what's going in his mouth. A lot of dogs chew up to maybe a year or two old even, and some dogs, like Labradors, chew even longer into their lives. So keep a really close eye on what your dog is chewing on in the house and make sure he doesn't swallow anything that he should not have. And watch your dog in the garage carefully, keeping him away from any kind of chemicals that people keep in the garage that are for the lawn or for the car. Antifreeze in particular is a problem, and they do make some pet-friendly antifreezes now, but most people don't need to keep antifreeze in their garage unless you live in a northern climate, and you might consider getting one of those plastic Tupperware things, and again, putting a child safety lock on it, the upright cabinets, to keep any chemicals in if your dog may be lounging in your garage in the summer. Antifreeze tastes really good, and so you can't really blame a dog for finding it, but it is fatal, so you want to keep that away from your dog. And also at this time of year, we want to share what we're having at picnics with our dogs, and fatty meats, fat drippings, fat left over from a roast. All of that is really bad for your dog, and if it's too much for you to eat, it's definitely too much for him, and your dog can get pancreatitis, which is an emergency, and it can be life-threatening if it's bad enough. So you really want to make sure you keep fatty meats to a minimum for your dogs, as well as don't give them things that would qualify as garbage. And the final thing I'll remind you about is compost piles, because where are you going to put that grease other than out in the compost pile maybe? And you need to make sure that your dog can't get into the compost pile. put some kind of a fence around it, not just chicken wire that your dog can pull a little tasty thing out of, because the mold and the chemical processes that compost is undergoing is very toxic to dogs sometimes. And you also have to be aware that your compost pile could attract wildlife to your yard that may also not be good for your dog, such as porcupines and skunks and bears, foxes, coyotes, other sorts of wildlife that you don't want your dog to have an encounter with. So a compost pile can be a wonderful thing for your yard, especially if it's just leaves and things. But think twice about putting food scraps in there, even if it is something like eggshells, because it will make it more appealing to your dog and to wildlife. And as again I said, the mold that can be growing in that pile can be really not good for your dog. So think carefully if you do a compost pile somewhere near your house. Oops, double post. Oh, hi Neely. Anyway, so those are a few things to keep in mind this summer so that your dog does not earn you a trip to the emergency room. We spend so much time with them outside at this time of year, and it's so wonderful to meet with our family and things, but make sure you keep an eye on your dog in the backyard. Make sure he's truly fenced in, especially if you visit a neighbor or a family member who says, oh yeah, our yard's fenced, let him off the leash. It might not be as fenced as your dog thinks it is. And I have seen my friends' dachshunds dig out under stones by my gate in about a minute and a half. So especially if you have a dog that likes to dig, keeping a close eye on them in the yard. And keep ID tags on their collars and get your dog microchipped. So thanks for joining us today for this episode of Conversations with a Corgi. We are going to try to do some things before it rains today. And we will be leaving the Cape tomorrow for another week back home before we come back to the Cape. Are you tired? Tristan had a lot of walking yesterday. Apparently it's raining in Western Mass currently, but not quite here yet. Thanks for joining us. Everybody have a great day.